I still remember the first time I saw Emily. It was a Tuesday afternoon at that little coffee shop on Elm Street, the one with the chipped blue awning and the smell of burnt espresso that somehow felt comforting. She was sitting by the window, sunlight catching the loose strands of her dark brown hair as she scribbled something in a notebook. I wasn't the kind of guy who believed in love at first sight, but that day I hesitated before walking in. Something about her made the air feel different. I ordered my usual black coffee, and by some stroke of luck, the only empty seat was at the table next to hers. She glanced up when my chair scraped against the floor, and for a second we just looked at each other. No words, no cheesy pickup lines, just a quiet, unexpected moment where the world seemed to slow down. Then she smiled, and that was it. We didn't talk that day, not really. Just a polite, "Sorry, is this seat taken?" and a soft, "No, go ahead." But the next time I came in, she was there again, and the time after that. By the third week, it wasn't an accident anymore. We'd nod, then smile, then finally exchange names. Small talk turned into real conversations about books, about how she hated the winter but loved the way snow looked at night, about how I'd always wanted to learn the guitar but never had the patience. Nothing profound, just little pieces of ourselves handed back and forth like gifts. Our first real date was at a diner off Route 9, the kind of place with sticky vinyl booths and a jukebox that only played songs from the 70s. She laughed when I spilled ketchup on my shirt, and instead of being embarrassed, I laughed too. That's how it was with her, easy, like breathing. She told me about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and I told her about my dad's old Chevy and how he taught me to change the oil when I was 12. We didn't talk about money or jobs or the future. It was just us, a plate of half-eaten fries, and the quiet understanding that this mattered. For months, that's all we needed. Walks in the park with her hand in mine, lazy Sundays where we'd lie on the couch and argue about bad movies, the way she'd hum off-key in the shower while I made breakfast. I'd never been the kind of man who believed in soulmates, but with Emily, it was hard not to. She wasn't perfect. She was stubborn, hated admitting when she was wrong, and always stole the last bite of my dessert. But she was real. And for a while, that was enough. I didn't know then how things would change, how the cracks would start small, almost invisible, until one day I'd look at her and realize I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me. But that came later. Back then, in the beginning, there was just warmth, just her, just us. And God, I miss that. It started with little things I should have paid more attention to. Emily had always liked nice things, sure, what woman doesn't? But there was a difference between admiring a dress in a store window and that quiet disappointment in her eyes when I joked, "Maybe next paycheck." At first she'd laugh it off, squeeze my hand and say, "I don't need it anyway." But over time the laughter got thinner. The silences after grew heavier. The first real moment that stuck with me was at her friend Jessica's engagement party. I just finished a double shift at the warehouse, my back aching, but I still put on my one good button down and combed my hair for her. The party was in some upscale loft downtown, chandeliers, champagne flutes, the whole thing. Emily looked beautiful that night, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. When I asked about it, she just said, "Oh, Jessica let me borrow it." But then I caught her standing by the window, staring at Jessica's ring, a diamond so big it caught the light even across the room. I came up behind her, kissed her shoulder, and whispered, "Yours will be even prettier." She didn't turn around, just kept looking at that ring, and said, so quiet I almost missed it, "When, though?" The ride home was quiet. She scrolled through her phone while I drove, her thumb pausing every few seconds on some influencer's vacation photos. "Look at this place," she murmured, showing me a turquoise ocean stretched behind a 5-star resort. "Can you imagine?" I smiled and said, "Maybe one day," but my gut twisted. I knew what a week at a place like that cost, more than my car was worth. Then came the comments, small, offhand, like she wasn't even aware she was saying them. "Mark's wife just got a promotion. They're buying a house in Briarwood." Or, "Did you see Sarah's new SUV? It has heated seats." At first I told myself it was just conversation, but then I noticed how she'd linger by my laptop when job listings were up. How her texts started taking longer to reply to when I mentioned picking up extra shifts. One night, as we lay in bed, she rolled over and asked out of nowhere, "Do you ever feel like we're stuck?" I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight. "What do you mean?" She sighed, turning away. "Nothing. Forget it." That's when I knew. It wasn't about the things, it was about me. I was the thing that wasn't enough. And the worst part? She wasn't wrong. I remember the exact moment I decided to start working myself to the bone. It was a Thursday evening, and Emily had just come back from lunch with her college friends. She was quieter than usual as she unpacked her bag, carefully avoiding my eyes. "Good time?" I asked, wiping grease from my hands after fixing the leaky kitchen faucet. She hesitated just a second too long. "Yeah, Melissa just got engaged. The ring is incredible." There was that look again, the one I'd started seeing more often. A mix of longing and something sharper, something that made my stomach clench. That night I lay awake staring at the water stain on our bedroom ceiling while Emily slept beside me. The next morning, I went to my supervisor and volunteered for every overtime shift available. The warehouse became my second home. I'd arrive before sunrise and leave long after dark, my muscles screaming in protest. The guys started calling me Machine because I never turned down work. What they didn't see was how I'd sit in my car afterward, too exhausted to immediately drive home, staring at the photo of us from our first anniversary that I kept on my dashboard. When payday came, I surprised Emily with dinner at that Italian place she loved, the one with the white tablecloths where the entrees cost what we usually spend on groceries for a week. Her face lit up when she saw the bracelet in the little blue box, and for a brief, beautiful moment, everything felt right again. But the relief never lasted. Soon I was taking on weekend shifts at my uncle's auto shop, spending my only day off covered in motor oil and exhaust fumes. The extra cash went toward the designer purse Emily had casually mentioned, then toward the deposit for a better apartment she wanted to tour. Each purchase bought me a few days of her warmth, like putting quarters in a parking meter to buy more time. One particularly brutal week, I worked 82 hours between the warehouse and the shop. On Sunday night, I came home to find Emily dressed up, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "You're going out?" My voice came out hoarse from exhaustion. "Just drinks with the girls," she said, smoothing her dress. Then, noticing my expression, "You're working again tomorrow anyway, right?" I nodded, swallowing the bitter taste in my mouth. As she left, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror she'd just used. Dark circles under my eyes, a fresh cut on my cheek from a slipped wrench at the shop. I looked like a man slowly disappearing. The breaking point came when I found the credit card statements hidden in her nightstand. Charges for spa days, expensive lunches, a weekend trip to Napa with friends I didn't recognize. All while I was eating gas station sandwiches for dinner and patching my work boots with duct tape. That night, as I soaked my blistered hands in warm water, a terrible thought crept in. Maybe this wasn't about providing for us anymore. Maybe I was just paying for the privilege of watching her drift further away. The numbers in our bank account grew, but the distance between us widened with every deposit. I was selling pieces of myself to keep her happy, but the exchange rate kept changing. And at some point I had to wonder, when there was nothing left of me to give, would she even notice I was gone? I first noticed him at Jessica's summer barbecue. The way Emily's posture straightened when he arrived, that nervous flutter of her fingers adjusting her hair. "That's Ryan," she said too casually. "Works in private equity." He wore the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never worrying about rent. His watch probably cost more than my truck. When he laughed, it was with his whole body, like a man who'd never been punched by life. Emily brought him over to introduce us. "Ryan, this is Mark." His handshake was firm, patronizing. "Emily's told me so much about you," he said with the faint smile of someone who'd already won. I watched them all evening, how she leaned in when he spoke, how his hand lingered at the small of her back when passing through the kitchen. The way she laughed at jokes I knew she didn't find funny when I made them. On the drive home, the air in the car was thick with things unsaid. "Ryan seems nice," I offered, gripping the wheel too tight. "He's just a friend," she said, staring out the window. But her phone buzzed 3 times before we reached our exit, and when I glanced over, I saw his name lighting up her screen. The texts became more frequent after that. She'd angle her phone away when I walked by, but I'd catch glimpses, inside jokes, late-night conversations. Once I woke at 2 a.m. to find her side of the bed empty. She was on the balcony, phone glowing in the dark, whispering, "I shouldn't be talking to you like this," with a smile in her voice. At work, I'd find myself staring at the warehouse clock, wondering if they were having lunch together. My productivity slipped. My supervisor pulled me aside. "You used to be my best guy," he said, disappointment heavy in his voice. I wanted to explain, but how do you tell someone you're losing a fight you didn't know you were in? The final gut punch came when I found the receipt in her jacket pocket. Dinner for 2 at Le Maire, $380. The date was last Tuesday, the night she'd said she was working late. I sat on our bed holding that slip of paper, staring at the dent her body still left in the mattress. The numbers blurred as my eyes burned. Not from the amount, though that stung, but from the realization she'd chosen the one thing I could never compete with. And the worst part? I understood. In his polished shoes, with his stock portfolio and vineyard recommendations, he could give her everything I'd been breaking myself to provide. That night, when she came home, I didn't confront her, just asked if she'd had a good day. As she turned away to hang up her coat, I caught the faintest trace of his cologne on her skin. Some battles aren't lost in dramatic confrontations. They're lost in quiet moments like these, when you realize you've become the obstacle to someone else's happiness. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. I was scrubbing motor oil from my hands when Emily walked into the bathroom, her reflection hovering behind mine in the mirror. There was a determined set to her jaw I hadn't seen before. "We need to talk," she said. The words hung between us like a guillotine blade. I turned off the faucet slowly, watching rust-colored water swirl down the drain. My stomach knotted before she even continued. "I'm not happy, Mark." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I want more than this. We should be further along by now." The bathroom suddenly felt too small. I could smell the lavender fabric softener she always used, mixing with the sharp scent of the industrial soap from work. "Further along how?" I asked, though I already knew. "Everything." Her voice gained momentum now. "A house in a decent neighborhood, vacation, security. My friend Lauren just bought a Tesla, for God's sake. We're the same age." I stared at the cracked tile beneath our feet, the one I'd been meaning to fix for months. "I'm doing everything I can, Em." "That's just it." She stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming the soap smell now. "Your everything isn't enough anymore. I need real stability." The words landed like physical blows. I thought of the overtime hours, the missed family gatherings, the way my body ached constantly now, all the deposits I'd made into our joint account while withdrawing from myself. "So what are you saying?" My voice came out rough, unfamiliar. She took a deep breath. "I think we should take a break, unless ... Her eyes met mine for the first time. "Unless you can see a real plan for us to move forward, properly." The unspoken words vibrated between us. "Unless you can suddenly become someone else. Unless you can magically afford the life she wanted." I thought of Ryan's smug smile, of the way Emily's face lit up when his text came through. The math was simple. I couldn't compete with a fantasy. "When?" I managed to ask. 6 months, she said quickly, like she'd been rehearsing this. "If things haven't changed by Christmas." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. That night, I lay awake listening to the rhythmic sound of her breathing beside me. The woman who used to fall asleep with her head on my chest now kept carefully to her side of the bed. In the darkness, I traced the outline of my phone where it listed job openings in other states, places where the cost of living might match what I could provide. But even as I searched, I knew the truth. This wasn't about geography or salaries. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being the man she wanted to build a life with and become the obstacle to the life she believed she deserved. And no amount of overtime could fix that. The final unraveling came on an ordinary Wednesday, the the kind of day that should have been forgettable. I'd taken a rare afternoon off to surprise Emily with lunch from her favorite deli. The key still turned smoothly in the lock, but when I stepped inside, the air felt different, charged with something I couldn't name. Her voice carried from the bedroom, laughing in that particular way she only did when truly delighted. Then Ryan's answering chuckle, deep and familiar. The deli bag slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. For a long moment, I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at our framed photos on the wall. The two of us at Coney Island, her lips pressed to my cheek, our first Christmas together in this very apartment. The glass reflected my face back at me, pale and strangely calm. The bedroom door opened before I could move. Emily froze when she saw me, her smile dying mid-laugh. She wore the silk blouse I'd saved 3 months to buy her, now wrinkled in ways that told their own story. Mark. My name sounded like a plea on her lips. Behind her, Ryan sat up in our bed, the sheets tangled around his waist. His expression shifted from shock to something uncomfortably like pity. I turned and walked out. Not dramatically, not angrily, just mechanically, like a machine powering down. The elevator took forever to arrive. I counted each floor as it descended, focusing on the numbers to keep from thinking about the way Emily's perfume still clung to my shirt from our goodbye kiss that morning. She caught me in the parking lot, barefoot and breathing hard. "Please," she gasped, grabbing my arm. "Let me explain." I looked at her hand on my sleeve, the manicure I'd paid for last week now chipped. "What's left to explain, Em?" The words poured out of her. How it just happened, how she never meant to hurt me, how confused she'd been. Each syllable landed like a stone in my stomach. When she started crying, I realized with dull surprise that I felt nothing. No rage, no heartbreak, just emptiness where love used to be. "I think you should go back upstairs," I said quietly. "He's waiting." Her grip tightened. "Don't you even care?" That's when I laughed, a raw, ugly sound. I cared too much for too long. That was the problem, wasn't it? The drive to my brother's place passed in a blur. He took one look at my face and wordlessly handed me a beer. We sat on his fire escape as the sun set, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. "You okay?" he finally asked. I considered the question. Not yet, but I will be. That night, I lay on my brother's couch staring at the cracks in his ceiling. My phone buzzed constantly. Apologies, excuses, then finally anger when I didn't respond. By midnight, there was just one text. "I'm getting my things tomorrow." I didn't reply. Some stories don't deserve closing lines. The woman I loved had become a stranger wearing a familiar face, and no amount of words could change that simple truth. In the morning, I returned to find the apartment hollowed out. She'd taken the expensive cookware, the designer pillows, all the things we'd argued about money for, but she'd left behind the coffee mug I made her in pottery class, its handle still slightly lopsided. I held it in my hands, tracing the uneven glaze with my thumb. The silence was deafening. I sat on the floor where our dining table used to be, sunlight streaming through the bare windows. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared. Life went on. And so would I. 6 months later, I found Emily's favorite earring behind the dresser while cleaning out the apartment, a tiny pearl stud she'd always complained about losing. Holding it in my palm, I expected pain to come rushing back. Instead, there was just quiet recognition, like finding an old receipt for something you no longer own. The movers had just left when my phone buzzed. A mutual friend had sent me a photo. Emily and Ryan at some rooftop party, her draped in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was smiling, that radiant smile I used to wake up to. I deleted the image without saving it. I drove across the country that summer. Somewhere outside Denver, I pulled over to watch the sunrise paint the Rockies gold. The air smelled like pine and possibility. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring myself against someone else's expectations. In Chicago, I took a job at a small machine shop. The pay was decent, the hours fair. On my lunch breaks, I'd sit by the river watching tour boats glide past, sketching designs for furniture I might build someday. The calluses on my hands softened, then reformed differently, not from desperation, but from purpose. One rainy October evening, I ran into Sarah, an old friend from college. Over coffee, she asked about Emily. "She's engaged," I said, stirring my drink, "to some finance guy." Sarah studied my face. "Are you okay?" I considered the question. The truth was complicated. I still woke sometimes reaching for a body that wasn't there, still caught myself saving funny memes to send before remembering. But the ache had dulled into something bearable, like a bone that healed slightly crooked, but healed nonetheless. "I loved her," I said finally. "But love shouldn't require you to erase yourself." Walking home that night, I passed a jewelry store display. The engagement rings glittered under perfect lighting. I thought of all the overtime hours I'd worked, the things I'd denied myself to keep up with her dreams. Now my extra money went to guitar lessons and a decent pair of hiking boots. Small luxuries, but mine alone. The last box of Emily's things arrived in November. A few books, a scarf I'd forgotten about, no note. I donated it all to the thrift store down the street. Winter came early that year. I spent my weekends learning to cook proper meals, the radio playing softly in my tiny kitchen. Sometimes, when a certain song came on, I'd pause mid-chop, transported back to that coffee shop where it all began. But the memories no longer cut like glass. They were just moments now, fossilized in time. On New Year's Eve, I toasted alone in my apartment, watching snow swirl outside the window. The future stretched before me, uncertain but mine to shape. I'd learned the hard way that some people aren't meant to stay. Their lessons wrapped in skin and bone. And the greatest lesson of all, you can't pour from an empty cup. I clicked my glass against the window pane, whispering a quiet thank you to the ghost of who I used to be. Then I turned out the light and went to bed, early, rested, and finally at peace.